Live from Sydney, this is Inside with me, Paul Allen, where we dive deeper into the stories that matter with crucial context and sharp analysis. Well, China's economy grew faster than expected in the second quarter, but remained at its weakest pace in a year. Booming exports were offset by consumers and companies cutting back on spending. Credit Agricole's chief China economist Xiaojia joins us with her outlook as China's leadership gathers in Beijing for a key four-day meeting. Japan's ruling LDP reportedly reached a coalition deal with the Ishin party, paving way for Takaichi to become the country's first female prime minister. Waseda University professor Mieko Nakabayashi joins us to discuss whether this alliance can last. Meanwhile, geopolitical tensions in the Middle East are in focus again as the Trump-engineered ceasefire frays. Israel strikes Gaza and suspends aid shipments, saying Hamas attacked its troops. Our top story today, President Trump looks to ease escalating trade tensions with China just a week after threatening an additional 100% tariff on Beijing. In an interview on Fox News, Trump admitted that his latest threat was not sustainable, though he believes it could stand. His comments come just days before a fragile trade truce with Beijing is set to expire. Trump is now setting his sights on securing what he describes as a fair deal with China, as both sides prepare to return to the negotiating table this week in Malaysia.
We'll see what happens with China. I've always had a great relationship with them, as you know. But they're always looking for an edge. You know, they ripped off our country for years. We're going to meet in a couple of weeks. We're going to meet in South Korea, actually, with President Xi and other people, too. But we're going to meet. We have a separate meeting set up.
China's economy also getting a pulse check ahead of talks with the US. GDP slowing for a second straight quarter, growing at its weakest pace in a year at 4.8%. Retail sales also grew 3%, marking the slowest expansion since November. The broad slowdown was buffered by surprising strength, though, in industrial output. That expanded 6.5% and topped all estimates. Let's take a look at how stock indexes are reacting off the back of that data. And we did see a little bit of a pickup in stocks. The CSI 300 now better by about 0.75%. We've got the Hang Seng, though, powering ahead now, better by 2.4%. Well, let's get the reaction to the latest set of Chinese economic data with Xiaojia, a chief China economist at Credit Agricole. Xiaojia, thanks so much for joining us today. And I do want to start with that headline GDP number, 4.8%. It's weak, but it was better than expected. Also, we have to remember that all of this data is backward-looking. So would you say that the worst is over for growth, deflation, or are those all underlying trends that are still in place?
Thank you so much, Paul. I think the GDP growth deceleration is indeed within our expectation. We forecasted 4.8%. And in Q4, however, I think growth will likely continue to show more notable signs of deceleration even from Q3. That said, for this full year, I think China will just be okay to achieve around 5%. Indeed, we are forecasting 4.8% GDP growth for this full year. So if China could achieve, say, a little bit slower growth, but not too much, say, for example, 4.4, 4.5, China would just be about 5%. But if we look at the latest data, it's not that assuring as the headline GDP growth, because if we look at the retail sales, it has been continued to slow, 3% in September. If we look at fixed asset investment, in the first 9 months is fell by 0.5%. Actually, it's the first negative reading in year-to-date terms for the first 9 months outside of COVID time. So it does show that it has been a widening gap in terms of China's demand and the supply situation. Demand side, the activity data continue to show more growth, more cautious growth growth prospect with still very tepid consumer sentiment and further continued decelerations in fixed asset investment, while IP this month has been so strong, 6.5%, that has received the benefit of the continued resilience of exports. That said, exports so far it has been very strong. September 8%, but with this further intensification of the U.S.-China trade relations, there could be still some of the rush of shipment to U.S. and further front loading. But whether this could be continue to be the very strong growth drivers for China, I'm not that optimistic. So I think in coming months we probably still see continued growth deceleration in China.
Yeah, I want to dig into the prospects of improving that trade relationship in a moment, but I just want to get back to that range of potential outcomes and forecasts you gave for growth there. How important is that when you consider the fourth plenum's getting underway? How do you see the Chinese policymakers adjusting settings in the coming month, and what sort of impacts is that going to have on growth?
Yeah, for the fourth plenum, I think is mainly the outlet for the top policymakers to discuss its strategic plan for development and reform in the next 5 years. So I think the key themes around this fourth plenum and the 15th five-year plan could be mainly about three things: is technological innovation, industrial development, as well as how to rebalancing the economy. So in the past 5 years, I think China has already put a great emphasis on innovation and continue to develop those frontier industries. China has made notable progress on that front. However, if we look at the continued intensification of the U.S.-China relations and down the road, the trend of structural decoupling and the increasing tech competitions between U.S. and China, and not to mention China has been also facing a lot of domestic challenges, and that it would be continue to have an impact on China's growth in the coming years, becomes more urgent for China to really have put a bigger emphasis on technological innovation to upgrade and transform its industries and stay at the forefront of those in technology advancement to break those technology bottleneck and to achieve tech reliances to down the road. I think that has been probably much pricing is well expected by the market. That said, I think market would be very interested to see how China could introduce those policy guidelines and the structural reform plans to rebalance the economy, in particular how to boost domestic demand, how to promote this unified national market, and to better rebalance the supply-demand situation for this so-called high-quality growth. I think for the current setting, how China going to stimulate the economy, how to ease its macro policies to achieve stabilizing of the growth, I think we are going to continue to hear from the policymakers, not just about this fourth plenum, but several other meetings in the coming months would give more clue.
Yeah. Look, in terms of domestic pressures as well, and you're quite right, we are anticipating a focus on tech reliance in the fourth plenum. But we must talk about property as well. I mean, we saw property investment contracting 13.9% in that latest set of numbers. Can you give us a sense of how tight that link is between confidence in property and the confidence of the consumer? Because retail sales is still pretty flat. Can you not deal with one without dealing with the other?
Right. If we look at the latest property data, is indeed continue to trend down rather than stabilizing or rebounding. If we look at this morning property price for the new home sales, it actually further edged down, down by 0.4% compared to last month. And if you look at the September property investment continue to decline, I think China has been really have continued to roll out those property easing measures, notably by removing all those restrictions in the fiscal market. That said, I think this property deleveraging will likely still take some time. I think China sees this property deleveraging as the part of the risk management for the whole economy, but the current focus, I think, is more about how to upgrade its industries, how to be better positioned in terms of driving the long-term growth that will be supported by China's gain in total factor productivity. So I think this property is indeed continue to weigh in on consumer sentiment. That would call for China's continued policy easing in targeted areas. Property, I think, we're still going to see some supportive measures, but it is unlikely to be super aggressive. China will continue to roll out those incremental fiscal measures, say how to drive these consumption, how to increase China's how to better support household income, especially for those low-income groups and targeted household. I think that could be China is trying to achieve a balance of how they are going to roll out their policy easing measures.
We just got a couple of minutes left, and I do want to touch on that trade question because I'd like to know how much confidence you have in this potential Trump-Xi meeting coming up in Korea. How do you see the trade relationship evolving from here?
I think since last week, we have seen some of the signals from both sides. They want to still manage the downside of this U.S.-China relations, and then they want to prevent a rapid fall of this trade between U.S. and China. I think they both reckoned for now they still have this mutual independence on each other in key areas of the chips and also rare earths and critical materials. So I think so far the senior officials between U.S. and China will likely continue to work on the plan to pave the way for the Xi and Trump meeting in South Korea later next week. That said, we think we should not have a very high expectations of major breakthrough from this meeting. I think this meeting would definitely be hoped by the markets, as I think this meeting could could offer the venue for the leaders to define the scope of the trade negotiation directions and to manage the downside.
All right, Xiaojia, Chief China Economist at Credit Agricole. Always great to get your insights. Thank you so much for joining us. Still to come this hour, the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas showing signs of strain. We're going to have the latest on efforts to keep President Trump's peace plan on track. This is Bloomberg. Israel has launched strikes against Hamas in Gaza and reportedly suspended all aid shipments. Israel's blaming Hamas for breaching the ceasefire agreement brokered by the U.S., while Hamas maintains that it's committed to the truce. President Trump, meanwhile, has urged Hamas to disarm.
We're going to find out. So it's not a hard timeline, but it's a line in my own mind. And at a certain point, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then we'll have to do it for them.
Well, let's bring in Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor, Jumana Basetje, in Dubai. So, Jumana, tell us about the latest about what's happening and what is the risk here for the ceasefire in terms of how enduring it could be?
Yeah, well, Paul, this is the biggest challenge yet we've seen since the beginning of that ceasefire from just a week ago. But over the weekend, both sides blaming each other for violations of the ceasefire. Israel were quick to blame Hamas for a lethal Palestinian ambush on an IDF vehicle that killed 2 Israeli soldiers. In response to that, the Israeli Prime Minister saying that they would have to retaliate in a very strong manner. And indeed, that retaliation came on Sunday with the IDF launching 100 airstrikes over Rafah and various parts of Gaza, in addition to temporarily suspending all aid shipments. Now, the Gaza government media office says that Israel has killed at least 97 Palestinians and injured 230 others since the start of the ceasefire and have violated the truce agreement 80 times. On Israel's side, they say that they have continued to fire to prevent incursions across that yellow line. That is the line that they withdrew to on back of the implementation of phase 1 of the deal. However, both sides also seem to be repeating that the truce, that the ceasefire is going to hold up. And indeed, President Trump was asked about it, and he said that the ceasefire is still holding. And perhaps one signal that Washington is intent on keeping the ceasefire going is that you're going to get some heavyweights traveling to Israel throughout the course of this week. You have Steve Witkoff alongside Jared Kushner and the Vice President J.D. Vance traveling to the region, reportedly to keep an eye on the state of the ceasefire and to ensure that no violations take place.
Yeah, we've also heard the U.S. warning of an imminent Hamas attack on Palestinians. What more do we know about this, and what's Hamas saying?
So this is interesting because it's in response to some videos that emerged over the course of the last week whereby Hamas militants were seen executing Palestinians in retribution, in response to what they say these Palestinians allying themselves too closely to Israel. So those were images that were widely shared on social media. And in response to that, the U.S. have said that Palestinians need to be on alert in case these types of killings take place. But President Trump took it one step further, as is characteristic for him. He put up a post on Thursday evening saying if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. That is a literal quote from the president. And the key here is the focus on, again, those key terms throughout the rest of the Gaza deal, which is reimagining what the future of Gaza will look like, what governance will look like, and the disarmament of Hamas. And so far, Hamas officials have said that while they're willing to not participate in future governance, they're less willing to put down their arms. And this is a point of key debate, a key contention here, and clearly is going to be one of the subjects that the U.S. delegation will be having to think about. Because also, Paul, one thing you need to bear in mind is in order for those reconstruction funds to be released, many Arab states, including the likes of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have said that they will not spend a penny on Gaza unless there is a credible form of governance established that is not Hamas. And so still a lot of matters to be resolved in the coming weeks and coming months.
All right, Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor Jumana Basetje there in Dubai. Now we're also tracking developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the war with Russia should be frozen along current battle lines before any peace talks. But Russian President Vladimir Putin continues to demand that Ukraine cede the entire Donetsk region in the east to Russia. President Trump has also reportedly pushed Zelensky to give up territory to Russia during their meeting on Friday that left the Ukrainian delegation disappointed. Well, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says having a durable peace in Ukraine will require U.S. backing. Speaking with Bloomberg, Carney also thinks the likelihood of Washington imposing further economic sanctions against Russia is increasing as President Trump's patience is tested.
Winning militarily on the battlefield, getting to a position where there is a peace accord, a ceasefire, a frozen conflict, some understanding. They can get to that position with the support of Europe, the support of Canada, the support of Australia, the support of a few others, and with the U.S. more in a secondary role. having a durable peace, a durable end of hostility, will require U.S. It will require. The form that could take is under active discussion at the military level, at the national security level. We are part of those discussions. It is right that nothing has been concretely agreed and spelled out. But I would say the level of engagement is encouraging.
With the US? With the US,
yes.
So you're hoping you get there. The problem is that right now it does seem that Russia is emboldened. Drones in NATO airspace, jets in NATO airspace, as happened over Estonia.
I would rephrase. Russia's under pressure. Russia's under pressure. They're trying what they can to shift, but they're under economic pressure. Their military situation, they were making some progress over the course of the summer. That progress has stopped. Some of it's begun to be reversed.
But it's unnerving for a country like Estonia to have Russian jets in its airspace.
It's Canada has frontline troops in Latvia.
All right, but here's a very concrete thing. If that happens again, do you support the idea of a NATO country shooting down that Russian jet?
The direct, all options are on the table without question. There are ongoing consultations within NATO. NATO countries defend themselves, and certainly we will do what's necessary in order to protect those countries.
Are you warning Russia that it is possible that a NATO country would shoot down one of their planes?
If I may, so that, for example, the Polish government has made those warnings directly in public.
There is a precedent because Turkey did it to a Russian plane 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of message that you think it might take at a moment like this to show Russia that NATO is serious? Because President Trump isn't really showing Russia that America is serious about Ukraine.
I think President Trump has been very important in this process. He has given peace a chance, so to speak, with Russia. He has been at lines of communication with Vladimir Putin, with his special envoy, Steve Witkoff. There's been direct conversations. There's been opportunities for Putin to take off-ramps. Putin has not taken any of those off-ramps. The president speaks for himself, but I think his patience is being exhausted. His line is hardening. The likelihood of further economic sanctions against Russia is increasing, and the severity of those next phase of sanctions could be a different order of magnitude than previous rounds of sanctions. All of that is pointing in one direction, and I would underscore Russia has been moving at literally a snail's pace in terms of acquisition of territory, temporary acquisition of territory in Ukraine over the course of the last 3 years. And they're not going to win. They're not going to win this war.
That is Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking there on the Michelle Hussein Show. Let's take a quick look at how oil prices are tracking at the moment. Tracking lower is the general theme here. We've got Brent 61.06, New York crude now with a 57 handle. Oil's falling again. This is the third weekly decline now. A few macro factors at play here. We did have a fairly weak set of numbers out of China just now, even though that third quarter GDP was a modest beat at 4.8%. However, growth still pretty soft. Prospects of US-China trade tensions easing, also helping oil a little, but the path of least resistance still seems to be weaker as production just keeps on coming on. Coming up, NHK says Japan's ruling LDP party agrees to a coalition deal with the Ishin party, paving the way for Sanai Takaichi to become the nation's first female prime minister. We'll have analysis next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. NHK says the leaders of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party and the Ishin Party have agreed to form a coalition. Now, the deal sets the stage for LDP head Sanai Takaichi to become Prime Minister after weeks of negotiations with opposition parties following the collapse of a decades-old coalition with Komieto. Let's get more now from Bloomberg senior editor Brian Fowler. So, Brian, tell us about how this deal was reached, and does this guarantee that Takaichi will be Prime Minister?
Well, Paul, we had seen momentum building in recent days as Ishin party leaders and LDP leaders got together and negotiated over policies. We've seen the two parties come together. They started out fairly close on a lot of global issues. They're the same page for security, for diplomacy. They both want to see more nuclear power in Japan. Some of the domestic issues, on the other hand, were a little bit more difficult, I think. And we've seen them come together on that. They've agreed to reduce the number of parliamentarians. And that, I guess, looks like reform. I think it's meant to look like reform and maybe even distract from another key issue that the Ishin put forth, which was tighter controls on political donations. I understand the two parties have agreed to adopt tighter controls on that, but not for another 2 years when they'll ban corporate donations to political parties. As to your question about whether this guarantees she wins, the two parties combined have 231 seats in the lower house. That's still 2 seats shy of a majority. However, given the disarray in the opposition camp, it's pretty much all but guaranteed that she will win the prime minister job in a vote tomorrow.
Brian, the market's certainly liking this news. The Nikkei right now just shy of a 3% gain. What's going on here? Is this a relief rally or is a fiscal stimulus coming down the pipe?
I think you hit it on the head there, Paul. It's fiscal stimulus. Takaichi is very much a reflationist in the same mold as her mentor, Shinzo Abe, and his Abenomics policies. So she's definitely standing for expansive fiscal policy. On the monetary side, she has in the past indicated that she would urge the Bank of Japan to go slow on rate hikes. She might stick with that. On the other hand, doing that might add to inflationary pressure in Japan by weakening the yen. We all saw over the last year how soaring cost of living really took a toll on the LDP in elections a year ago in October and then earlier this year in July. So one of the key questions will be, does Takaichi stick with that stance on monetary policy, or does she realize that that inflation is really a much bigger concern for the LDP right now, and maybe gives a green light to the BOJ to go ahead and hike rates?
All right, Bloomberg senior editor there, Brian Fowler. Let's just take a quick look at how those markets are tracking. It is firmly risk on in Japan at the moment. The Nikkei index just below 3% gains at the moment. The topic's better by 2%, and those gains are broad-based. Every sector on the Nikkei in the green at the moment. Communication services leading the way, up 4.6%. Consumer discretionary also better by about 3%. Well, let's get insights now from our next guest, who was a member of Japan's House of Representatives. Joining us now from Tokyo is Mieko Nakabayashi, Professor of Political Science at Waseda University. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mieko. I just want to start with a point that Brian was making there about the areas of policy overlap, the areas of policy disagreement between Ishin and the LDP. How enduring do you see this coalition is going to be?
That is a very interesting question. Actually, on a Japanese nationwide TV show, I was with Mr. Yoshimura, the leader of Ishin, and we had a good conversation about differences of the two parties. All in all, two parties needed each other. I think that was the biggest point, that they somehow came to an agreement. However, their policies are very different. First of all, Ishin is not an expansionist fiscal policy believers. They are more for a budget discipline and shrinking government. However, Ms. Takaichi's policy is, as Brian pointed out, very reflationary policy. Therefore, we don't know eventually whether they can come up with the same supplementary budget or the next year's full budget. And it depends on how each other needs the other. So far, it seems that Ishin desperately needs something because their popularity was declining. And LDP has been suffering unpopular financial scandals and all sorts of things. Whether they can recover from them will be how they can compromise each other.
Yeah, well, also, as Brian was pointing out there, the coalition now has 231 seats in the lower house, which is still just short of a majority. Now, it's probably going to be enough to get Takaichi over the line as Prime Minister. But going forward, in situations like this, the smaller coalition partner has a lot of power. Do you see Ishin perhaps extracting some policy concessions, and what might they be?
Yes, Ishin stated clearly that reducing the parliamentarians' number is the first thing to do. And Ms. Takaichi appeared to agree with that. That means Ishin must really agree today on how many seats and by when the reduction should be implemented. Once it is cleared, Ishin would write Ms. Takaichi's name for Prime Minister's appointment. Also, there are one seat or so to be included into LDP's camp. That could be possible. The problem is, after being elected or appointed as Prime Minister, Ms. Takaichi's path is going to be very, very tough because there are more opposition parties trying to make their own points in terms of economic policies, financial kickback programs, and corporate donations, regulations, and so on. So we'll see whether Ishin and Ms. Takaichi can really get together. Interestingly, at this point, still Ishin is wondering whether they are sending cabinet members or not. If the party, the small party, doesn't want to seize one or two cabinets, then that is a very weakening sign of the coalition. Although Ms. Takaichi offered at least 2 cabinet seats to Ishin.
You did mention that the government will be facing a substantial opposition in the parliament, and it doesn't have a majority. How organised is the opposing bloc, and do you see, or how great is the risk that Japan could enter a period of policy paralysis where the government finds it very difficult to get anything done?
That's true. Opposition parties are pretty split. That was the reason that the Democratic Party for the People couldn't be united with the largest opposition party, Constitutional Democratic Party. And they actually discussed deeply about their own policies. However, it became rather clear that they cannot get together. Therefore, there are opportunities for Ms. Takaichi, for example, to get the populist Democratic Party of the People to agree to her own some of the economic policies. However, there are political fund problems, ideological rigidity of the right-wing people who support Ms. Takaichi very vigorously, and economic policy ambiguity, whether she can really pursue her own economic policies of expansionary budget and other things. As Brian also pointed out, that if she becomes realistic, it is almost impossible to implement her original economic policies. and limited diplomatic experiences of Ms. Takaichi. She has never taken any defense or foreign ministership, and we don't know how she can deal with international leaders and be in the community. So we will see how this can turn out and how opposition parties can help her out.
You mentioned there the amount of opposition to Sanai Takaichi becoming Prime Minister, Japan's first female Prime Minister, and I'm wondering how much of that opposition comes from a place of policy and how much of it could be an element of sexism, and it's particularly interesting as your own position as a former female Member of Parliament.
Well, for Ms. Takaichi, being a woman is a huge asset. Even opposition parties, mainly dominated by men, cannot give her a difficult time, even if, well, actually, they think that male, if Ms. Takaichi was a male, then they would have given maximum difficult time. However, because she's a woman, it is very difficult for them to give her a difficult time because there are more female and opposition forces saying that, well, opposition parties are giving difficult time because she is a woman. This kind of things can be easily said. Therefore, I think opposition parties would have a very difficult time because she's a woman.
All right, that was not the perspective I was expecting. Also, she does have on her side time. The next election not due until 2028. What reforms do you think that Sanai Takaichi can put in place by then? What's her popularity like, and what are her chances of fighting the next election from a strong position?
Yes. Her mission within the LDP is to bring right-wing supporters back to the LDP. It is necessary. But at the same time, all the promises she has made, like a nationalist and revisionist type of historic views and so on, cannot be implemented because of the international environment and opposition forces within the LDP. Therefore, her position can be blurred, and it is more difficult to be her own or herself. And opposition parties are rather focusing on political funding scandals or reforms to avoid any scandals. And that can actually change Japanese political landscape dramatically, because the LDP is totally depending on local politicians and national level politicians, depending on corporate relationship and donations. It is unknown whether the opposition parties can be successful at this moment, because Ishin is really retreating from that strong position, although Ishin was claiming that political funding scandal is not tolerated. However, they are now going to be with the LDP. That means maybe opposition parties' force is weakened a little bit. We'll see how much difficult time the opposition parties can give to the LDP and Ishin during the supplementary budget forming, inflationary economy to be resolved and somehow contained, and for the main budget forming to actually give more break to the people who are suffering from inflationary economy.
You mentioned a few moments ago that Sanai Takaichi doesn't have a lot of experience when it comes to foreign policy. How do you see Japan's relationship with key partners, the United States and China, evolving under her leadership?
Yes, her first test is going to be her attendance at APEC, and Chinese leader is there. And of course, Mr. Trump might come to visit Japan beforehand. And actually, Senator Haggerty and other leaders from the United States, even Mr. Schwartzman of Blackstone, came to Japan and met with Ms. Takaichi to probe what kind of thinking she has. And at the same time, maybe they inserted important points to her mind. And Ambassador to Japan, Ambassador Grass, also met her already. Therefore, the United States is trying to find out what kind of leader she will be, and hopefully to somehow give her good hints to be a good leader of Japan. She might be helped by lots of able assistants, bureaucrats, politicians, and so on. So we will see how she can do it. The point is whether she can speak a good English or not. That is a good point to see whether her leadership will be successful or not.
We will see. Mieko Nakabayashi, professor at Waseda University, thanks so much for joining us with your insights today. Now, let's get a look at how Indian markets are tracking, because we've heard from a number of the big banks in India recently. So we've got the Nifty Bank Index in a positive territory at the moment. In fact, all of the indexes pushing higher right now. We take a look at some of the banks in particular. ICICI better by 1.3%. Of course, did beat the quarter, had some healthy loan growth there as well, although margins were under pressure. Shares pushing higher, but up 12% year to date. They did underperform the broader index. HDFC, another bank that's reported, also beat the quarter. That's better by about 0.8% at the moment. So all Indian banking stocks are performing pretty well at the moment. We take a look at, ICICI actually losing a little bit of ground, but the broader bank index are pushing higher by 0.8%. Still to come. Global banks betting billions of dollars on deals for stakes in Indian lenders. We're going to look closer at the factors that are driving those moves into a sector dominated by local players. This is Bloomberg. We've got Indian markets up and running. Let's take a look at how the major indexes are tracking. Following much of the rest of the region, very much a risk on day across the Asia Pacific broadly. We've got the Sensex better by 0.75%. Nifty Bank Index also better by about 0.2%. Stocks are in focus today. We've heard from ICICI, which beat the quarter, HDFC as well. Reliance Industries also pushing higher. The quarterly profit was a miss, and we did see some weakness in petrochemicals as well. However, that notwithstanding, we're still seeing shares better by about 2.75% at the moment for one of the largest, if not the largest, listed stocks on the Indian exchange. Okay, let's take a look at how Indian banks are tracking as well. I did mention there ICICI is a little bit softer at the moment, down about 1.8%. Did beat the quarter, saw healthy loan growth, margins though under pressure. Shares are still up around about 12% year to date, but underperforming the broader index. Better looking set of responses for HDFC, also beat the quarter. The loan book increasing by 10% from the previous year. However, in the case of HDFC, mortgage loans still outweigh deposits, so it's under a little bit of pressure there to either raise deposits or slow loan growth. Now, we're also keeping an eye on shares of RBL Bank after Emirates NBD Bank said it's going to invest as much as $3 billion in the Indian lender. This is the latest in a spate of massive deals for Indian banks that have put the country's financial sector into the global spotlight. For more on this, let's get to Bloomberg Asia Pacific Deals team leader, Manuel Bajori. So, Manuel, what more can you tell us about this?
Paul, there is a lot of interest indeed in India these days. The pace of deal making in the Asian country has picked up rapidly. We've seen a lot of IPOs, tons of ECM activity in the last couple of years, and now we're seeing also M&As. So particularly in the financial services space, we are seeing a number of transactions. As you mentioned, NBD just struck a deal to invest $3 billion in RBL. That's one of the biggest perhaps we've seen in a while. But there are other deals in the horizon. We've seen a number of those in the insurance space as well, and there is potentially more to come. An interesting one that has been a flow for the past year or so. It's been also interest from Japanese banks. It's mostly driven by growth. Investors want to tap into the country's growth, and financial services is an area where the central bank has been trying to pass measures to stabilize and strengthen the sector. So it's likely that we'll see more deals in this space, Paul.
Does it also suggest a willingness perhaps from regulators to open up what used to be a pretty tightly controlled market around banking and shadow banking?
Definitely. It has been notoriously known for being pretty closed to foreign investors, but in recent months, the last year or so, there has been measures to open up. The central bank wants to ensure the financial system is stable. There is stability. There is credit flows, financing available, and part of that is led to these transactions. So I mean, the deal that we just saw announcing, I mean, it's quite remarkable to see Emirates investing $3 billion. Recently, we saw another deal from Abu Dhabi also investing $1 billion in another local bank. And as I mentioned, the Japanese lenders have been actively pursuing transactions in India as well. So it's a change, a significant turn of events for a market, as you said, Paul, that had been well known for being pretty closed to foreign investment.
All right, Bloomberg Asia-Pacific Deals team leader Manuel Baigorri there. Well, here are some more top global stories that we're following. 2 people are dead after a cargo aircraft skidded off the runway into the ocean at Hong Kong Airport early on Monday. 4 crew members on the plane, which was operated by Turkey's Air Act on behalf of Emirates Airlines, were rescued and taken to the hospital. An investigation is underway. Monday's accident was one of the worst in the airport's 27-year history. The Louvre was shut on Sunday after several pieces of jewellery were stolen in a daring daylight robbery. Several individuals are suspected of using power tools to cut through windows and a furniture elevator to enter the museum. The thieves broke into the Apollon Gallery, which houses the French crown jewels, stealing 8 objects, including a tiara, necklaces and earrings. 1 piece of jewellery was recovered during their escape. Okay, let's take a look at how Asia benchmarks are tracking. Best performing index in the region. Prize goes to the Nikkei, better by 2.75%, although it's off some of the highs that we saw a little bit earlier. And this on the news that the ruling LDP party may have formed a coalition with Ishin, which effectively ensures that Sanae Takaichi is going to become Japan's first female prime minister. So the market's liking that political certainty. But all around the region, we're seeing a risk-on appetite. The Hang Seng also better by 2.3%. That is it for Insight. Horizons Middle East and Africa are up next. This is Bloomberg.